Welcome to the second episode of the Anime Explorations podcast. I am one of your hosts, Alex Case, and I am joined by...
I'm David Stark.
And I'm Tora Stark.
And this is a monthly anime book club style podcast where we watch an anime series or movie and talk about it. And one of the things that I forgot to get into in our first episode, because it's a first episode and these growing pains are expected, is to appropriately give credit where credit is due for kind of the influences of the podcast. I kind of have two big ones. One is the Manga-splaining podcast, which is hosted by Deb Aoki and Chip Zdarsky and David Brothers and several other people in comics and manga as well. And part of the premise of that is most of the hosts of that show, like Deb Aoki and David Brothers, are longtime fans of manga and anime or have worked in translation and localization of anime and manga. And Chip Zdarsky absolutely positively has not, but he is an accomplished comics writer. And so that led to things that he brings a different perspective there. The other one is the Next Lander Watchcast, which is hosted by Alex Navarro, Brad Shoemaker, and Vinny Caravella, which is them watching movies and TV shows and talking about them, often of them being ones that some or most of them haven't watched before. Usually Alex Navarro's watched them, but Brad and Vinny haven't so much. So, to get into that, quick talking about our own background with anime and manga. I got into anime when I was in middle school. Watching Cartoon Network's Saturday anime block, not whole episodes of stuff, but parts of it, as well as reading an article about anime in, I don't know if David or Tora, if you remember 321 Contact magazine. There was an article in 321 Contact magazine about anime, like a one-page thing. I remember that it had Nadia from Nadia of the Secret of Blue Water featured on there, which I think had just been licensed at the time. So that was a pretty new work in terms of making out to the US. And it finally gave me a name of, oh, that's what this thing is that I like. And I've been more or less watching anime either from the library or streaming or from the high school through bootleg means ever since. David, do you want to give your background?
Well, I started watching anime fairly young, thanks to Robotech, though I didn't know that was anime at the time. I just remember, like, it was so much better than, like, the Transformers, because it was, like, this ongoing story as opposed to just one and done every episode. But after that, yeah, just cartoon, well, not even, like, even before Cartoon Network, there's, like, early morning Sailor Moon before heading off to school, and then after school, the Toonami block, Dragon Ball Z and the like, and just keep going from there.
And were you... Oh, go ahead, Tor.
Yeah, Sailor Moon was my gateway. Although, when I was a very little girl, Totoro was one of my favorite movies. The original dub of Totoro, which my dad rented for us on the strength of it just being a cartoon. And many years later, I was able to connect that back to anime when I got into anime proper through Sailor Moon and Toonami. Luckily, my parents were very much in that school of if it's a cartoon, it's for kids. So I would go to the video rental store when such things existed, and I could rent pretty much any anime that I wanted as long as I wasn't watching it directly in front of them. So I saw a lot of things, probably younger than I should have.
Oh, yeah.
Like
Yeah,
Mermaid
definitely.
Scar, for instance.
Oh, Mermaid Scar.
But
Yeah.
and then in high school, same as you, Alex, it was very much the era of you get it where you can get it because there wasn't a lot of imports yet. Although that really started to pick up by the time I graduated from high school in 2004.
Yes, you graduated
Yeah.
in 2004.
I'm old, guys.
We are all a bunch of, as they say these days, old taku. So before we started doing the podcast, were you still actively watching anime, or had you kind of fallen off a bit?
I was still watching anime in a very curated fashion because what happened was we went from watching everything that they sent over to the US to being oversaturated because they started sending over everything, which, don't get me wrong, is pretty great. But like in any medium, there are good examples and bad examples, and I got a little burned out on bad anime after a while, and so I would only watch things that were recommended to me by friends.
Yeah, and then we had a kid, so
And then we had a kid, and that just slows life down, guys, let me tell you.
yeah. Although I do very much still, when our son, like shortly after he was born, we had to make sure we were feeding him every 2 hours. So we had a really interesting schedule where one of us slept for 8 hours, and then we had like 4 hours together, and then the other one was sleeping for 8 hours, and then 4 hours together. So I had the night shift with our son, and I watched a lot of anime just with him sleeping next to me, waking him up every 2 hours to feed him. And then, yeah, to this day, Luke has a very positive reaction to the Yu Yu Hakusho theme because he heard it as a tiny baby a lot. Because I watched that entire show over those first few months.
So typical 90s kids, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. Accurate. So, quick bit of business before we get started. The usual engagement request of, we have an email address now. Like, we're a real podcast that has an email address. So, if you want to give your thoughts on this episode or thoughts on the show that we'll be doing next time, you can send them to animeexplorations, all one word with 2 E's, at gmail.com. And also, of course, please rate and review us on your podcast platform of choice that you're listening to it on. It really helps.
Yeah, and if you want us to review an anime, let us know.
Yeah.
Let us know if you've got requests.
Definitely. Within a certain degree of reason, we have to be able to get it somehow. But we will do what we can.
Yeah, we will probably not be able to get to Silver Spoon because of that. Despite it being perfect, it's not easy to get anymore.
Unfortunately, yeah. Same with Monster. For recommendations, keep in mind this is a monthly show, so if it's going to be something longer, we may have to break it out over a couple months. So, again, if we do Monster, for example, that's a longer one. So let's get into today's show. Boogiepop and Others from the 2020s. The Japanese title is Boogiepop Warunai, which basically means Boogiepop doesn't smile. And this is based off a whole bunch of light novels. This is kind of one of the first, in fact, Boogiepop and Others was kind of one of the first big light novel series of, like, sort of ever. The first volume came out in 1998 and had 23 novels. came out in the series, and so yeah, this was actually the 28. I think it was 2018 when when the show came out. Yeah, and sorry, 2019. So basically the 20th anniversary, more or less, of the novel publication. And if Boogiepop rings a bell, but not this particular series, there was a spin-off series called Boogiepop Phantom that came out in the early 2000s. That was a spin-off of the show and featured of the novels and featured characters, was very much a side story. There was also a live-action adaptation of the first novel in the series, entitled Boogiepop and Others, which I have not seen. I don't know if Dave and Tora, either of you have seen it.
Nope. No, but I feel maybe perhaps seeing something that was a proper adaptation might have helped explain the series, because
yeah. So the novel, or the film version, also was, because we're talking early 2000s. This was also very much shot on Digicam kind of thing. So sometimes it's referred to as shot on Shidio, but it has that Digicam look to it. For it, on some cases, also the footage being shot by the actors in the film. So it may be a bit of an acquired taste in that situation.
Honestly, anyone who's seen a film student project, you know sort of roughly what you're getting into.
All right, so the recent series, the one that we watched today, adapts 4 of the novels. Boogiepop and Others, the first novel. Boogiepop versus Imaginator, which came out in 2 parts. Boogiepop at Dawn, which is basically an origin story, and then Boogiepop. I forget the name of the last novel. I think Boogiepop and the King of Distortion was the 4th and final novel that's adapted here. Also, I watched this when these episodes when they first aired, and then I went and read the novels. So this is my first time coming back to them after having read the book, so I can kind of talk about them from that perspective. David, Tora, what were your initial thoughts on the show?
Well, I only very distantly remember the original Boogiepop Phantom, and I'm not entirely, and I don't actually think I saw all of it. I might have just caught an episode or 2. But I can let you know that I was very confused in this series. I don't feel it did a good job explaining things. For the first half of the series, and even then it didn't do a great job in the latter part, to me.
So this show, I feel like, is more concerned about tonality and feeling. It definitely has a vibe. And it is exploring a lot of interesting issues and questions, but in such a way I feel that the actual plot, what's going on, because it is not so concerned with plotting, it's very easy to get confused. So you end up just kind of cruising along on the vibe, and then as the series progresses, you kind of start to slot things into their places in the timeline, because it does skip around a little bit within episodes as well as across the series over these kind of 4 stories. And what you come away with is less a sense of a concrete story that was told to you, and more of kind of this feeling of unease and unanswered questions, which I don't dislike, but it is a little bit different from your typical offering, I would say.
Yeah. If there's a theme to the show that I took away, it was deal with your trauma. Because pretty much all of the characters, well, not all, but the vast majority of them are revolving either around their individual trauma or the trauma of others around them. Many of the antagonists hesitate to use villain, but definitely antagonists in the show are concerned with helping others either deal with their problems or changing these people so that their problems are no longer holding them back, either by messing with their memories or actually helping them.
Yeah, and this becomes outright stated in the final story with the King of Distortion. Yeah. But all along, the show is really good at showing you how kind of the placid, normal exterior of people and places and things is actually a lot stranger once you start to probe into it. And I do praise the series for the interiority of the characters, because I didn't feel like any single character was left to be just that normal guy over there. You know, like everybody had interiority and, as David said, specific issues and traumas to work through. And even if that trauma was something like I was mean to my friend right before she died and I never got to say I'm sorry, you know, that kind of deeply personal thing can change your whole life. So I thought the series was great at exploring kind of the interiority of the characters and how that reflects in their behavior to everyone else and the world around them.
Yeah, I feel it had a difficult time tying that into an actual story. Like, there was a lot, well, I can't say there was a lot happening, but there were things happening and there were these people dealing with them, but it didn't, to me at least, it didn't really mesh together as these events are affecting these characters in this way. It was more of these things are affecting the world and these characters are living in that world being affected by it, but it didn't connect.
Yeah, one of the things I thought about, I picked this show as sort of our Halloween candy in the freezer show, because we did our introductory episode for October. And when I was rewatching this, I thought in my head, oh yeah, Boogiepop and Others is a horror series. And to bear with this, when Crunchyroll did a list on their website of, oh, here's a list of horror series you should watch for Halloween, alongside stuff like Another and Hellsing Ultimate and that sort of thing, they included Boogiepop and Others. And on the one hand, while there are a couple stories with characters that are monstrous and killing people, Boogiepop and Others has the Manticore. Boogiepop at Dawn has the Fear Ghoul character, who are characters who are definitely killing people in horrific fashions. But related to that sort of sense of things happening around you and impacting you and not necessarily having control over them, I had this kind of thought about this of, like, there's a concept on TV tropes of the adult fear, of not just like a fear of somebody's going to attack you or stab you or that sort of thing, of a primal fear, but like, oh, something's going to happen to a family member that I want to protect and I'm powerless to help them, or that sort of thing. And Boogiepop and Others, through sort of semi-antagonistic force going through the series, the ambiguously described Tora organization, I guess I call a young adult fear, which is the realization when you, like, in getting into middle school or high school, of, oh, adults are just as fallible, or in some cases even incompetent, as I am. And when they screw up, and they will screw up, the consequences can be dramatically more pronounced, and I may not necessarily be able to do anything about them. And that, I think, fits in with that sense of dread that the show kind of really does a good job with, where a lot of the biggest threats in the show, to an extent, again, Manticore, Fear Ghoul, even at the end of the series, not the King of Distortion themselves, but the character who built the tower wherein the events all take place, are all entities created by or consequences of the actions of the Tora organization that went completely out of their control and caused shit to hit the fan.
My understanding is that the series is actually kind of a stealth sci-fi series in a way, because one of the stories is about an alien being who came down to Earth to judge humanity. He was captured by this organization, and he's the reason that they're able to make augmented humans and monsters like the Manticore, which was a clone of this being, and drugs like the ones the Fear Ghoul used to become, well, the Fear Ghoul. But it doesn't go into this too much, which I think is a good thing. Like, the show just leaves it as these very dark forces kind of just beyond the edge of your understanding that abruptly show up and ruin your life. And I agree. I think that's very much a fear that you start to come to grips with as a young adult, as a high school student. This sense that there is so much that is outside of your control. You have to just react to it the best way you can, because that's all you can control is your own reaction to it. And in this sense, I find Nagi to be the most interesting character, because her reaction to being exposed to these things as a very young woman was to kind of turn herself into a superhero-esque character to keep other young people from experiencing the effects of this dark other world. And so I wanted to see more about her, but we actually didn't get enough time with her for my preference.
She's very much what in like a shonen, an action anime, she would be the protagonist, but this isn't that kind of story.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think if they went that route, it would be pretty good,
but also more generic.
Yeah. I mean, sorry.
It's also interesting that for a show called Boogiepop and Others, definitely the sense is much more on the others than on Boogiepop. Boogiepop is not the protagonist of this show. And it's interesting where we encounter characters where... So, the explanation of who Boogiepop is Boogiepop is both a urban legend and a person. The urban legend is Boogiepop is this mysterious Shinigami, this reaper who people think will come and get you when you're at the peak of your beauty or whatever. But no, actually it is the alternate personality of a young, perfectly normal high school girl, seemingly perfectly normal high school girl named Toka Mayashita. And when weird crap starts happening, Toka manifests the Boogiepop personality. Probably the closest comparison to the other thing comes to mind, something that I had not seen and was not familiar with necessarily when I watched the show originally, but was familiar with now. Boogiepop is kind of Moon Knight.
Well, I don't think so exactly, because like we see at, in Dawn of Boogiepop looks different. So it seems that she's less of an alternate personality, or at least the way I understood it is more of a possessing force. And so...
Yes, the show leaves it ambiguous as to whether Boogiepop is some kind of supernatural entity or if Toka just has dissociative identity disorder.
Because that's certainly what some of the people think.
Or what's going on. And that contributes to the sense of, I don't know what's going on. Obviously, the characters don't know what's going on. What is going to happen to them? That sense of dread that we've been talking about that builds up. Because we don't even know, what the protagonist of the show's deal is. And you said they're not the protagonist, which I agree with.
Title character.
But the title character. There we go.
Yeah. One of the useful things mentioned also is Boogiepop and Toka, while it's the same voice actress for both, they speak differently. Boogiepop is more masculine. If you're listening to Japanese dubs, he uses masculine pronouns for himself, personal pronouns for himself, because that's a thing with Japanese. And whereas Toka talks like a teenage girl, and it also does have the bit of the Batman Bruce Wayne voice effect there, which makes for a few interesting things in a couple scenes where you have a couple characters, like you'll have Toka and Kazuko during part of the versus Imaginator arc. We're walking along a berm and talking, and Kazuko brings up some stuff that she's observed about what's going on with, she's picking up some stuff about Imaginator. And then Toka, just in the middle of conversation, switches to Boogiepop voice, drops a few lines in, and then switches back to Toka like nothing happened.
Yeah. And it's explicitly stated that Toka doesn't remember anything about what she does as Boogiepop or when Boogiepop takes over, however you want to think of it. She just carries the outfit around with her in her sports bag without even kind of realizing that she's doing that. So I don't know if that's evidence toward Boogiepop being just a facet of her own personality, or...
Well, except, like, towards the end, she didn't have her bag with her. Like, there was the rushing view of the cloak and the hat, and then it passed by her, and then she was rushing too. Toka was rushing too. So...
Yeah, so the show leaves it kind of an open question if Boogiepop is their own entity. The show, I will say, is very concerned with issues of identities, specifically ones that are brought out by and repressed by personal traumas. There's a definite undercurrent of pop psychology that runs throughout this whole show.
Yeah.
Which is both good and bad. Like, I do feel like the show is trying to get at some very interesting questions and make you think about things in an interesting way. But then some of it can feel a little bit reductive. And, specifically, I really like the fact that every character in the show has an interesting internal landscape. You know, everybody goes through their own issues, their own traumas. It's just that normally you don't see that because it's all under the surface, right? And so this show uses kind of the lever of the supernatural to make everyone show these different sides of themselves, which I think is effective. It's just that sometimes you're not sure if the show is doing this for a specific message or if the message is becoming muddled. And there were times where I felt like it was really trying to get at something deep, but it wasn't quite getting there. And that could be translation issue. I'm not saying it couldn't be.
Yeah, definitely a lot of... I felt it had a lot of the Evangelion Christian imagery thing of... Is it there to advance the story, or is it just there to kind of look cool? And yeah,
it doesn't necessarily help. Like this, since Bear's mentioning, this show was semi-contemporaneous, or the novels rather were semi-contemporaneous with Evangelion. Again, like 97, 98, and actually Bear's mentioning, like they update the technology in the show, but it doesn't feel like it messes with the show any, particularly because it helps that, like in the late 90s, early 2000s, Japan kind of adopted cell phones a lot faster than the US and probably also Europe did. And so elements of the sort of of the youth culture within the show, within the original work, regarding to people with cell phones and or text messages or that sort of thing, carries over well to this. I mean, arguably there's the problem of cell phone cameras are better now, so theoretically it's possible that someone could get a good picture of Boogiepop, but otherwise, that worked really well. Like that part carried over well. One of the things I was mentioning is not only does the show kind of talk about like sex and sexuality a fair bit. There's a character who is strongly implied to be a repressed young man who's grappling with his homosexuality in the Boogiepop versus Imaginator arc. Also, like drug use comes up, and that like almost never comes up, not just in like anime, but like a lot in Japanese pop culture. There was this one actor who was in a bunch of the Yakuza games, who got caught with less than a gram of cocaine and basically not quite unpersoned, but kind of unpersoned in the Japanese entertainment industry.
Yeah, I will say that for all the supernatural elements, the world of these characters did feel real and lived in. in a way that I appreciated. I think especially because it was a series of stories as opposed to one long continuous one like some series are. It was cool to see the same locations come up again. And even in some cases, we would see the same scene come up again from different perspective, or kind of a different time frame, but the same kind of thing going on, but from someone else's point of view. And so it all felt very consistent in that way, which I appreciated because I was trying to put it all together in my head the whole time. And I was just like, okay, that's this person, and they're doing this with this person, and this person had this trauma, and this person saw this monster, and
yeah,
there's a bit of a puzzle put together aspect of watching it that I kind of enjoyed.
Well, that was certainly,
even though it was a little frustrating.
Yeah, that was definitely the first arc where each episode is covering the same amount of time, but it's doing it, but each episode is covering different characters through that period of time. Like, yeah, first episode ends with Boogiepop telling the boy is like, well, I'm done. Threat's over. And he's like, but you have no idea what the resolution was because he wasn't there.
Mm-hmm. Oh, one other fun thing here. I almost didn't want to forget this is, so like in certain other franchises that popped up in the anime culture recently, because it actually started having its own new anime adaptation about the same time. Like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, there are a lot of music references in this show, including some remarkably deep cuts. Like in Versus Imaginator, there's like some like deep level Prince references in there. Like there's the obvious ones of the main like location for the climax of it is called Paisley Park, which is pretty straightforward. And there's a recurring motif in there of
the characters' names too, right? Camille and Spooky Electric.
Yeah, Spooky Electric, which Camille, I knew. Spooky Electric I was not familiar with, as far as the Prince reference. And also the Sometimes It Snows in April bit, recurring theme motif in that storyline, which so a couple years after this aired, and a couple years before I recorded this, we had snow in April in Portland, the Portland area. So I did end up going on social media and basically been going, God damn it, Imaginator.
Knock it off. Yes.
Not that. Shoveling the sidewalk. That was not something I was expecting to do in April. But I finally got to use my snow shovel.
Global warming is a facet of
climate
supernatural activity.
Climate change.
Well, yes, overall climate change.
Probably, like, going into this from reading the novels, probably the bit that, like, I was interested to see how they handled it was actually with King of Distortion, because King of Distortion in the novels, there's a couple recurring pieces of music that are playing constantly over the course of that. In the episodes, they are semi-generic rock tracks. In the novel, they are two specific tracks: Custard Pie and Kashmir off of disc 1 of Led Zeppelin's Physical Graffiti album, which causes the end of the episode, and to a certain degree the concept of the tower, to have a bit more where the story is set, to make a bit more sense, because the password that helps unlock everything more or less is Stairway to Heaven, which admittedly is the wrong album, but the right artist.
Right artist. Big leadhead over here. I can say with certainty that Kashmir would have improved that episode, because it improves everything. But yeah, Zeppelin is notoriously leery of licensing out their tracks, so I doubt that they even tried. But it would have been awesome.
Yeah.
I did like that the King of Distortion, the distortion was represented by this music and that kind of fuzzing and pixelating of the screen. So you had visual distortion, audio distortion, And emotional distortion was what was going on in the characters' headspaces.
All I needed was someone to play Kozilek, the Great Distortion.
Yeah, I went to Magic the Gathering too, I'm sorry. One other thing I'll say is I really enjoyed how the antagonists, as David said, I wouldn't necessarily call them villains. All the antagonists had very clear motives, and they were very well fleshed out as people. Like, you understood them all. I think the most unrepentant villainous one was the Fear Ghoul. But, I mean, she started out kind of a normal person and then injected herself with some experimental drugs, so we don't know how much of that personality shift was the result of the drugs.
I mean, it's standard Batman supervillain origin.
That's true. But the King of Distortion I felt particularly drawn to because he was trying to get everyone to overcome their own trauma, but he couldn't see into his own heart and deal with his own trauma, as Boogiepop points out at the end. And so I feel like he was kind of an interesting way to look at the series as a whole, as you can kind of handwave the supernatural elements if you wanted to as outside forces over which you have no control. Because I think what the show is really trying to get at is how you react to them and how you manifest your trauma in ways that add to the world rather than ways which threaten it or do harm to it and to others. And from that point of view, that was my favorite arc, even though there was a lot of other stuff going on in it.
Yeah. Yeah, the Great Distortion arc was definitely, I want to say, narratively the most satisfying, as opposed to Verse Imaginator, where it's all just handled real quickly and shoved under the carpet, so to speak.
Well, no, there are parallels there to the Great Distortion as
there
well.
There absolutely are, in that,
because the character who could see people's souls or hearts manifesting as plants couldn't see his own, so it was kind of the same idea there.
I'm just saying Great Distortion felt more satisfying, yeah, whereas Imaginator felt very rushed at the end.
A little bit.
Yeah. It also helped that we had as far as we're feeling like a big climactic story arc, King of Distortion did have the big set big set piece of the fight versus Zaragi.
Yeah.
With Boogiepop going, well, I've never fought a kaiju before. First time for everything.
The monster showed up and I was like, hey, you're not Godzilla. Pretty close, though. But I actually also loved that idea that this little boy's trauma was manifesting as a kaiju. That actually made perfect sense to me.
I mean, during that bit where they're, hiding from the kaiju, I just flashed right to that same bit in Pacific Rim where they're hiding from the kaiju, having to in Mako's memories.
And then the kaiju tries to manifest and become real, and Boogiepop has to stop it, which was interesting, although perhaps a little bit of a deviation from what was actually going on.
Mm-hmm.
But it was fun to watch.
Yeah. Whereas by contrast with the climax of Verse Imaginator, we do have a big fight with Boogiepop fighting a bunch of people in mascot costumes. I liked the idea of the wearing the mascot costume as protection against way you protect yourself against martial artists, like protecting yourself with plush.
Yeah, I laughed and I was like, "Yep, no, that's actually not a bad idea. I mean, use what you got, and you're in a theme park, so you got costumes."
The Versus Imaginator arc was also a little bit uncomfortable for me because of Camille or Aya, whatever you want to call her. The way that character was handled, and just the way that this character was constantly beat down and degraded and told she wasn't human, and then slut-shamed for doing what she was essentially ordered to do, had no choice but to do. I mean, I'm so glad that it ended happily for her, but as a woman, that was a little uncomfortable for me to watch, just because I've seen that sort of thing on a lesser scale in real life, and it's never good. And, you know, literally calling someone inhuman doesn't happen that often, but treating someone in that way, unfortunately, is common, and it's never comfortable to watch. And to see someone who has literally no sense of their own self-preservation because they've had that beaten out of them just hurts, you know?
No sense of their own self-worth.
Yeah, no sense of their own self-worth.
Yeah,
so that was rough.
I'd probably even say, like, as much as the Fear Ghoul is one of the clear, like, overtly villainous characters, Spooky Electric definitely, if not being equally villainous, is certainly a close second.
I think Spooky Electric was definitely...
He was the one I hated the most.
Yeah, he was definitely like an outright villain. I mean, there's... Like, his motivation is he hates everything because he knows what he is. He was artificially made for a mission, and he hates that, and he's going to take that pain out on everyone. Once again, someone not handling their trauma well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is also another good metaphor for what I said before. Like, he's an augmented human. He has this electric power. But like David said, he chooses to use that power to take out his frustration on everyone around him. And most of us don't have superpowers. Probably all of us don't have superpowers, but we choose what we can do with the gifts and the abilities that we have. And we can hurt people or we can help people. So I think at the core of the series, it's kind of asking that question. Like, what makes someone a threat to the world? Is it how they have weaponized their trauma? Is it their good intentions being used toward bad ends? You know, what does threat to the world even mean? And how does that criteria work for Boogiepop when she shows up to defend people from this kind of threat? Because a lot of the antagonists are sympathetic, or they think they're doing something right or helpful. And in the case of the King of Distortion, Boogiepop even agrees. Yeah, you're not my enemy. You're not doing anything particularly bad.
Why do you think I'm your? Why do you think I'm your enemy?
But I mean, yeah. In the case of the King of Distortion, you can't force someone to confront their trauma, because that...
I mean, he was trying.
He was trying, but he had like one success out of that entire building full of people.
That we saw. He had one success out of,
People have to choose to confront their trauma and make something good out of it.
And the kid who was like... He straight up told that... Oh, God, I cannot remember that kid's name. Misako. Yeah. It was like... It's how do I get out of here? It's so easy. And he's like, oh. And he just runs and finds the spot in the imagination where his body is. And you see him just then wake up.
Person.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. I'm terrible with names.
I meant the child.
No. I'm terrible with names.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously I was thinking about it in preparation for this podcast, because it is a show that makes you consider these things, which is its strength, I would say.
Yeah, and worth noting, we have not touched on that, is it is an incredibly well animated show.
Oh, absolutely.
Although, that being said, the tendency of people in the mid-range of the camera to not have faces was somewhat jarring.
I think if they had been a little bit more consistent with that, it would have added to the atmosphere, but it's a little bit selective, and so you're like, wait, why do you suddenly have no face?
Like, if it was just, like, the background characters, but, like, the main characters still got, had their faces, it would add to that sort of thing, to the theme of, the alienation of other people. You're isolated, everyone around you. But, no, it was just sort of... It was not handled well in a consistent manner, which made it obnoxious for me.
Yeah. This show did not, I will admit, get much of a big buzz among anime fans when it came out. I think to a certain degree, part of this is because of the impacts that the novels had at the time and how much they influenced other works that had a bit more impact when they landed here, because they did land here. Like, I'm thinking of things like Serial Experiments Lane, Welcome to the NHK, that sort of thing, which are also similar works about societal disconnection. I'm assuming I don't know if you are familiar with either of those shows. Where it was just societal disconnection and coping with traumas and that sort of thing as well. We're getting these stories like 20 years after they came out in Japan and made a big impact and inspired all these other authors, and then we get the works that have been at the time got the works in dialogue with it, and then we're not getting the actual original stories until much, much later.
That's a good thing to point out, because a lot of the themes that I saw in this show, especially relating to the question of what is a human, what is humanity a thing that's worth saving from a cosmic perspective, those are themes that I've seen crop up in countless animes over my life.
Yeah. And it didn't really give us an answer.
I'm not sure there is an answer to those questions.
There is an answer. The answer is yes.
But it's highly individualistic how you choose to answer that. What is a human?
Yes, yeah. But, what is a human? There's a lot of ways to answer that. But going by the show, the answer was everyone. Everyone is a human.
Which is a good answer.
It's a great answer.
Even the monster from outer space is relatable.
Monster from Echoes?
I mean Echoes. He wasn't a monster, but he was this entity sent to Earth to judge humanity. So from that point of view, it was kind of like, okay. You've seen our good side and our bad side. Now what?
Unfortunately, I am incapable of taking the I am sent here to judge you seriously due to the Venture Brothers.
Curse you, Venture Brothers.
And God, what was that episode? 10 Minutes to Midnight or something? And their alien judge was like, do not pay attention to me!
Ignore me!
Yes.
Don't look at the wizard behind the curtain.
So, yeah, I really enjoyed revisiting the show again. I'm glad I watched it when I first did. It's fun to come back to it again, particularly having read the novels and watched Moon Knight and various other things before then, and having additional lenses to view this in.
Would you say that it was more fun on rewatch?
A bit, yes, actually. Like, particularly, like, considering, like, contrasting the books with the show, where, like, the show handles the shift in perspective, or the shift with Boogiepop and Toka so much better, because you have a voice there, as opposed to on the page where it's translated text and you're not necessarily getting the pronouns, because that's not how English works. And that sort of thing. That actually reminds me, did you watch the dub or subtitled?
We watched the dub.
Watch the dub, because that's what was available on Crunchyroll.
Okay. How did
the sub might be, but it wasn't the first one that came up.
Sub was on there as well. So how did you feel about the voice acting, both in general and kind of for the Boogiepop and Toka transition?
I felt that it didn't do a great job at differentiating characters, and also due to the fact that due to at least early on most people are wearing school uniforms, the show did not do a very good job at differentiating its characters, at letting me be able to tell, okay, that's that person, that's that person, that's that person. and that a lot of the characters felt very samey due to the fact that they had very similar haircuts, very similar hair style or hair colors. The designs were not that differentiated. I mean, there's like 4 characters who all have long dark hair, and I mean, it's anime. The faces look very similar, so the only way to tell them apart was through voice or through, specific hairstyle. And since it was just like 3 different lengths of haircut that's all long and back, I had I was not very able to tell them apart. So I was like, oh no, this person's dead. And they come in the room, oh, I guess that was somebody else.
I also had a hard time telling characters apart, at least initially. And I think part of that is my own Americanness, my own kind of American racism with not being able to parse the Japanese names so well. Don't get me wrong, I really appreciate that they use the characters' actual Japanese names in the dub. I think that's great. But my English-speaking brain was like, okay, which one is this? But I thought the voice acting was good. I really enjoyed Boogiepop's voice, actually. The only thing I think American fans should be aware of is that we're really missing out on that pronouns game. I was just thinking of Boogiepop in my head as a she, because it was obviously the same voice, but an extremely different manner of speaking, which the voice actors pulled off really well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. She did a great job.
But
no
gosh, we really do need better pronouns in English, I gotta say. It's true.
Well, it's not that we need better pronouns. It's that we need a dialogue that that individualizes your pronouns every time you're speaking. Instead of just I, it's I, male adult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is why in English you have to ask everyone what their pronouns are. There's otherwise no way to tell. But I don't think it ever comes up in the dub that Boogiepop identifies as male. So that just, if it did, it went completely over my head, but I'm pretty sure it's never mentioned.
All right. So, if you are interested in our conversation, want to watch the show, it is currently available for streaming again on Crunchyroll. There also is a Blu-ray release of it, which is available on Right Stuff. And since we're getting into the holiday season, it's probably going to end up on sale. Just a reasonable guess that it's going to be on sale. And so probably will be the novels.
Gotta hit those sales.
Speaking of things that are also probably going to be on sale, but are in keeping for the next month for December, in keeping with the holiday spirit, we're going to be doing a Blast from the Past. One of the fun things that's kind of happened in the anime industry over the past 10 years. We've been getting lots of fun old stuff that was not licensed previously or had been licensed but was never really distributed well. And that's what we're talking about next month. We'll be doing the movie Nutcracker Fantasy, which was put out by a stop-motion film made by Sanrio in the late 1970s. This film is both available in Japanese audio and with the English dub on Retro Crush, and has received a Blu-ray release from Discotek Media. So you can pick it if you prefer it physical. You can get it that way as well. I believe the English dub also features the voice of the legendary Sir Christopher Lee, if you're going dub on this one.
All right. I'm looking forward to it.
Good old Count Saruman himself.
Well, and I went to art school really quickly for everybody. I know a lot about the differences between Western animation and anime, but for stop motion, I have no idea. So I'm very interested to see.
All right, so you can look forward to that next time. And if you have any questions or comments, either about Boogiepop and Others, or for Nutcracker Fantasy, then go ahead and send those to our email address. Once again, that is animeexplorations@gmail.com. Thank you very much for watching, or listening, or however you are doing this.
Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
Yeah, thanks for listening.